China's urbanization rate will hit 60% by 2018, a startling transformation from below 20% 40 years ago, reflecting China's remarkable economic development. There is, however, a dark underbelly of China's urbanization: migrant workers. Over 280 million people, almost 1/3 of urban populations. Second-class citizens in the cities they themselves built by the strength of their backs and the sweat of their brows, migrant workers are one of China's most pressing problems. How unfair that those who sacrifice so much to enable China's economic miracle enjoy so little of its fruits, with limited social services, especially health care and education. Long-term, everyone recognizes that migrant workers must be integrated fully into city life. But how to pay for it? What happens to their rural lands? What are the long-term strategies? What are recent experiments? Underappreciated are changing demographics of migrant workers. A unique Chinese characteristic: migrant workers must be appreciated to be closer to China. Yang Se-ching is 53 years old. He has been working in Beijing for 17 years. When he first came to Beijing in 1990, he worked as a carpenter.
When the
sun rose, I went to work. After a day's hard work, I rested and slept in a park, because I was poor at that time.
After years of hard work, Yang Se-ching became a foreman in charge of 12 people. Now, at a construction site, he is working together with his son. His son, Yang Han-wei, grew up in rural areas and he came to Beijing after junior college. He works on decorations.
The reason I chose to work here is that I want to earn more money, because there's not a lot of job opportunities in rural areas. The salary in big cities is much higher than in my backward hometown, and the working environment is better.
As a decoration worker, Yang Han-wei doesn't have a fixed salary. In good times, he can earn as much as 4,000 or 5,000 RMB per month. Other times, he earns far less.
Basically, I work 8 or 9 hours per day. To be honest, I don't have any vacation. I work every day throughout the whole month. Even though I am tired, I will hold on to my work, because no work, no money.
In China, there are more than 280 million people like Yang Se-ching and Yang Han-wei. They are called migrant workers, which refers to rural residents, formerly farmers, who are now working as laborers in cities. Migrant workers make significant contributions. They build cities and staff factories. But they cannot enjoy the same rights as urban citizens do. They do not have the same health care or social security, and their children do not have the same educational opportunities. Dealing with the migrant worker problem is critical for the development of China. Everyone recognizes this. Focusing on migrant workers, I speak with 3 thought leaders. Yang Zhiming, former Vice Minister of the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security, Professor Li Chang, Dean of the School of Social Sciences at Tsinghua University, and He Yupeng, Vice President of China Institute for Rural Studies at Tsinghua University. What has been the transformation of migrant workers, and what new problems does a new generation of migrant workers bring to the cities?
Rural migrant workers were born out of China's reform and opening up policy. Specifically speaking, as China promoted the rural family contracted responsibility system in the 1980s, agriculture got liberated with a tremendous increase in productivity, which further caused a huge surplus in the rural labor force. So where should they go? The rise of village and township enterprises witnessed an initial period where migrant workers left the fields but remained in the rural area to work in farms and factories. Then in the new century, with China's accession into the WTO, as well as an acceleration of industrialization and urbanization, huge batches of migrant workers, including those in the most poverty-stricken areas, left their hometowns. Some from a loose plateau, some out of the remote mountains and dense forests to look for work in the industrial centers in China's coastal areas that first embraced a leapfrog development.
Describe to me the demographics of migrant workers in China.
So far, China has about 280 million migrant workers in total, accounting for 4 out of every 10 people in the city. Of those 4, 1 is migrating intra-province, 1 is intra-province but far away from home, and the other 2 work in the counties close to their homeland, which we refer to as leaving the land but remain in the countryside. This is the basic structure of the migrant population in China's urbanization.
What are the demographics in terms of male-female ratios, adults, children, older people, as you look at these different segments?
Out of the 280 million migrant workers across China, 170 million have moved out of their local towns and counties. Of these, 2/3 are male and 1/3 are female. In other words, such a structure is inconsistent with the general gender structure and thus indicates a unique feature of urbanization in China. That is, migration in China is still labor-based instead of household-based. And this is an issue we need to tackle in future development. Among the total, only about 20% migrate on a family basis, with the remaining 80% on an individual labor basis. They just migrate like birds of passage and return to their rural homelands when they reach a certain age.
How does their income compare to what they earned as farmers in the past? What's the multiple?
We could say a farmer's salary from his job in the city accounts for a large share of his total income, almost half of the total. While in the past, household income would account for the majority. Now its percentage has already dropped to below 40%. So without question, salary is now key in a farmer's family income and also stands as the fastest growing source.
The income, because they were farmers and then they became urban workers, they still have farm income? You mean? I don't understand.
The case in China is somewhat unique compared to many other developing countries because of our special land system. As the farmers leave for the city to work as migrant workers, they still keep their land contractual management rights. Their land won't be taken back because of them leaving. This also explains the reason for the mere 1/3 of female migrant workers against the total. The women stay home for a reason. As a matter of fact, those females who stay in the countryside generally find a part-time job in the locality during the slack season and farm the land whenever the land calls for attention. Therefore, in a rural family's total income, income from the land still accounts for an important part of it.
Are there any historical examples that have any commonality with what China is doing, or is China totally what we say sui generis, a kind of itself that has never happened before?
280 million is the actual number at the moment. Yet in the coming 10 to 20 years, there will be another 200 million to emerge and to accommodate. So in total, we will have 500 million migrant workers to take care of. This is at the same time a tremendous pull and a huge challenge for China. If we take a look at the history of urbanization in other countries, we can immediately realize the difficulty for China to realize such a leapfrog development within such a short period of time. It is a very tight schedule for urbanization. American scholar Ray Northam put forward a concept known as the Northam curve, referring to the period of urbanization where its ratio grows from 30% to 70% as a period of accelerated growth. So to achieve urbanization, countries all over the world would normally take around 100 years on average. What about China? Only about 35 years. Urbanizing 500 million people within a time frame of 35 years. What a drastic transition. If we look at the UK and the US for reference, we find that both countries spent 50 years in achieving urbanization, as China did to level the percentage up from 20% to 50%. Yet for China, it only took us about 30 years to realize the same transformation. You can just imagine, within such a limited time, what pressure the Chinese government has been faced in order to address public service and equal rights issues for such a large population.
Yang Hongwei faces many problems. Among them, his children's education and Social Security are top of the list. Yang's little girl is 2 years old. For her education, she will have to leave her parents and return to her hometown where her family is registered.
Although I'm not discriminated against in the city, I still want to go back to my hometown in the future because the living expense in Beijing is too high and my children cannot get a fair education here.
Hukou is the government's official household registration required by law in China. The Hukou system, which was introduced in the 1950s, ties people's access to services to their residential status. When controls on movement were relaxed, tens of millions of migrant workers left their farms and fields to work in towns and cities, contributing mightily to China's spectacular economic growth. But it bears repeating. Migrant workers do not enjoy the same benefits as do city residents. According to latest data, the average wage of migrant workers in Beijing is about 3,400 RMB per month, while the average of Beijing citizens is about 9,800 RMB. The gap is huge. What's more, migrant workers also lack social services and welfare.
Speaking of the national policy, I have only two wishes. First, I hope my children can enjoy a fair education as city children do. Second, I hope migrant workers can enjoy better social security, especially medical insurance.
Have there been any calculations to show the contribution of migrant workers in their transformation from rural farmers into factory workers and blue-collar workers and other in terms of the differential? So what percentage of the GDP, either today or 2030, is contributed by the 280 million today or ultimately 500 million that have transformed from rural residents to urban residents?
This is a question often asked. Regarding the migrant workers' contribution to China's economy, different calculations give different answers. But data from the World Bank and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences are more often quoted and more widely acknowledged. That is, as China's economic growth rate has been maintained at around 10% during the past 30-plus years, 20% of the growth comes from migrant workers. That is, say, the annual growth rate is 10%. Then the migrant workers' contribution is 2%. And further, as the city expands and the migrant workers work in the city for industrial development, structural efficiency increases owing to the higher efficiency industry than in agriculture, so there naturally comes more growth. In the meanwhile, as more people gather in the city, there arises a cluster effect. Usually, if the density of population doubles, the productivity would be raised by 10%. So in this sense, we should recognize the tremendous contribution of migrant workers to China's economy.
Majority of the migrant workers, they work very hard. So I remember I did a survey, but not right now, in the year of 1990s. The average working hour for the migrants in the cities in the year of 1990s is over 12 hours every day. You know, they never have a holiday. So we understand that the sharp increase of the Chinese economy is really high percentage of the contribution from the migrants.
Migrant workers, as we know, do not have the same rights as urban citizens in all the social services, healthcare, education, pensions. So do you see a growing resentment among the younger, the new generation, because of this wealth gap?
看来你对好多农民工具体问题呢都有细致的。
You really have some minute observations on the issue of migrant workers. The 13th five-year plan covered such issues as your concerns and put forth plans to solve them in the near future. In summary, there are 10 aspects of the efforts involved. Those workers will be provided with job opportunities for coming to the city, training for work, labour contracts, measures for getting insured, a guarantee of a daily job, improvements in accommodation, channels for protection, cultural nourishment for life, education for their kids and goals for development. That is, we will do our utmost to help the migrant workers live like normal citizens. To do this, we have to realize two basic transformations. First, transform those low-skilled workers into technicians, some senior technicians, or even experts. In this way, the migrant workers can become better adapted workers to enter the emerging industries during China's economic transition, or workers in modern industries. The other transformation is that we would help a number of them get temporary residential permits, with some special cases getting registered with permanent ones. Through such measures, we can even help more migrant workers to work in companies, their kids to study in local schools, their families to get better integrated into their local communities, so that they themselves as a group can get more involved in the bigger society. That's to say, we should promote them to get more integrated as a part of city life.
More than half of the city residents today are migrant workers. To bring them up to urban citizens for social services is a huge cost for the cities, with health care and education and pensions. I mean, it's impossible for the cities to pay for that.
The cost of social inclusion of migrant workers is also a heatedly discussed topic, as local governments need to shoulder the burden. They also give careful consideration to this issue. I think we should take a comprehensive view toward it. On the one hand, it is beyond question that migrant workers contribute tremendously to the development of the city. On the other, with due calculation, the cost is not too huge to bear. I used to work in a development research center under the State Council, and we did research in 2009 and 2010. According to our calculations back then, the cost for migrant workers' public service is 80,000 RMB. Then I also came across more updated research in 2014 by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, which estimated the cost to be around 130,000 RMB. Well, the cost of 130,000 includes the cost paid by the individual and the enterprise altogether, while our 80,000 excludes the two, only referring to the cost of public expenditure.
A year or so ago, I did some television work with migrant workers, and I spent time in a migrant worker school. It was in Shanghai. And at the very young ages, and I also visited schools that were for the very wealthy, private schools. And when I met the young children, 5 to 8 years old, say, they were very, very similar. I mean, it would be very difficult to say who was the migrant worker and who was the wealthy citizen from the town. But as they got older, the difference got more and more and more profound, so that after their education, after 9 years, the difference was enormous.
农民工子女接受城市教育是农民工
To get migrant workers' kids educated in the city is a common desire for the many workers coming to the city. It's an important way to help them get out of the trap of poverty generation after generation. Currently, the number of schools specifically designed for migrant workers' children are shrinking nationwide. Over recent years, the number of new ones has also been reducing. I can give you an example. A professor from the School of Labour and Economy at the Capital University of Economics and Business has launched a 10-year investigation of 200 families of rural migrant workers to see how their kids are getting compulsory education in the city. His conclusion after this long-term observation is that as these kids follow their parents to the city, they enjoy quality education in city schools and can mostly grow up to become technicians, senior technicians, or expert technicians. While their rural friends who didn't follow their parents to the city mostly end up as normal, low-skilled workers. The difference has been caused by their lack of compulsory education in primary and middle schools in their childhood and adolescence. As they grow up and one day come to the city, most of them still have to start as a low-skilled worker and gradually improve their skills to try to become a technician. Therefore, quality education in the city is the most important life-changing tool for migrant workers, especially those from poverty-stricken areas, to end their intergenerational cycle of poverty.
As I hear the story of migrant workers in China, I'm actually reflecting on my own background, because if you look to the early part of the 20th century, and New York City as an example, the refugees that came in from Europe and Eastern Europe, my grandparents were all from Eastern Europe, from Romania and Lithuania and Poland and Hungary. There were Italians and Irish during that time, and when they all came, they lived in what was effectively shanty towns. My grandfather sold umbrellas on the street corner. And then my father was born in New York, but never had a chance to really go to college, and had to work in labor, and then he built a business after a while. And my generation, third generation, you know, I was able to have all full services and have full education. You know, that's a possible analogy that I've seen. It's different than coming from a foreign country, and the numbers are much smaller. But there are these kinds of massive social movements, and what's happening in China is really unprecedented in history.
You mentioned the shanty towns in Western countries. Actually, this is also a problem for Chinese migrant workers or laid-off workers who just live in shanty towns. But history has long indicated the necessity of a process for solving these problems. Looking back at Western history, just as you said, New York was once troubled by the problem of European refugees. And then Europe experienced the Industrial Revolution and urbanization in the 19th century and witnessed many movements around 1840. Chartism in the UK, the spring of nations in the European continent, in Prussia, in France, etc. Well, different disciplines offer different explanations. Some interpret them as political movements, some as anti-feudalism campaigns. In the perception of economists, all of those countries were actually undergoing rapid urbanization, during which process farmers migrated to the city and received various forms of inequality. It was just after those revolutionary movements that European countries started to address issues like equal pay for equal work, migrant workers' social welfare, etc. We know that the system of social security was actually designed by Prussia in the late 19th century in order to address problems like public welfare and so on. For some other issues like public health, the UK took the lead to a certain extent as well. Therefore, I think China now faces similar issues as the developed countries used to deal with. They only hit on the right track of sound development after they resolved issues centering around urbanization. If China also manages them, we'll also blaze a new trail with Chinese characteristics.
Does the requirement that China now has to restructure its economy away from low-cost manufacturing, away from cheap labor, into higher value-added, more high-tech products, service-oriented, does that make the problem worse because migrant workers are less likely to be trained in those kinds of fields? And what can the government do to rapidly upgrade the quality of the migrant workers?
This is a very interesting topic. As China undergoes economic transition, what if the low-skilled workers get removed from their former positions? I think we should take a dynamic view of it. Yes, indeed. As labor prices rise, machines are definitely going to replace manpower. With this trend going on, some of the jobs in manufacturing will be pushed out. According to statistics in China, the absolute number of employees has been decreasing over the years. But on the other hand, we should also be aware of the special background in China that differs from other countries throughout history. That is, the first half of urbanization in China is also a process of industrialization. After achieving 50% of urbanization, it has been compounded by the information revolution, hence the information age. Then what impacts would the information age bring to urbanization against the current background? It is an issue well worthy of attention. I mentioned that the number of employees has been dropping in manufacturing. This is a fact. So will those people become jobless afterwards? Actually, we should note the opening of new job opportunities created in the economic transition. There are new forms of employment which helps, for instance, with the development of the service industry. It gets combined with the Internet Plus, which has created many job opportunities in delivery in the city. So with close observation, you will actually find more newly added jobs during these years than the years witnessing the peaks of economic development.
Does the government have a target date that would say by a certain date we would like to see that the vast majority of migrant workers are fully integrated into the social services of the cities in which they live?
Yes, indeed, as I have just mentioned, to achieve comprehensive social inclusion of the migrant workers, we need to take several measures. First, getting them registered with the local hukou and solving the issues with household registration. Second, covering all the permanent residents in the basic public service network of the city. Third, coordinating the basic public service systems of the cities and countryside. That is, we should integrate the urban and rural public service systems. And through such measures, we strive for equal rights for migrant workers as compared to their urban counterparts. This is a process and takes time, so we have set a short-term target to address problems at different levels for 3 groups of migrant workers, with each group numbering 100 million. So at least 100 million should be given an urban hukou so they can enjoy equal rights with the city's permanent residents. But this goal of equality is not limited to 100 million. This full coverage of basic public services for permanent residents will be gradually extended as well. That is, the urban services will be enriched and expanded to cover larger groups of people. And this process can be compared to the abolition of the grain coupon system. As we had increasing food and grain, especially marketable grain, we didn't need the grain coupons anymore. So regarding the equal rights of migrant workers in the city, I think the same story applies. With their increasing rights, it may also lead to a natural abolition of the household registration system.
Although migrant workers are not poor by technical definitions of poverty, their standards of living lie far beneath their fellow urbanites. How sad to see young children of migrant workers, so full of enthusiasm to learn in primary school, only to be limited by reduced opportunities as they grow older. Migrant worker demographics are a game changer. 60 to 70% of migrant workers are now young people, and the vast majority, over 95%, are never going back to the farms. They have never lived on farms. But if migrants move their registration to cities, what happens to their rural lands? Can they sell their lands and buy urban apartments? It sounds simple, but it's fiercely complex. Experiments are in the works. Helpful is a change of mindset from migrant workers as a huge, unaffordable cost burden for cities to migrant workers as a huge source of domestic consumption for the country, needed as China restructures its economy. But China's new economy must turn from low-cost labor to knowledge-based work. Key is education, training, and retraining. Migrant workers are not the most glamorous topic, but they are closer to China.